How's it going today, guys? Welcome back to part 3 of my talk about my first trip to Puerto Rico back in 2022 and 2023. And where we left off last time, I just finished my walk from Isabella to in between Guada and Rincon, where I went to meet up with my friends again that I stayed with in San Juan for a month. And they rented a place in the Villa Marsana Guest House of Wellness, and it was a pretty awesome spot to stay at. I remember being real beat up when I first made it there, and it's not just your average Airbnb, it's pretty luxurious. It's literally a 2 or 3 minute walk away from the ocean, and it's a really calm part of the ocean there in Puerto Rico where you can swim and get your feet wet, and lots of private beaches. Surprisingly enough, there's not a lot of people out there, which really threw me off guard for a minute. But I had a good time there, and I spent that time, well, the 3 weeks while I was there, basically recouping from the walk. But I had a lot of little side missions. I wanted to go photograph the cemetery of Aguada itself. I wanted to go photograph the cemetery in Aguadilla. I wanted to photograph the Rincon Cemetery. And I also spent one day walking out to Mocha, Puerto Rico, so I can film the cemetery there too. So that kept me busy for a lot of the 3 weeks while I was staying at that place. I had a lot of technical difficulties during my stay at the wellness center, much like I did during my walk across the North Coast, with not having very much memory on my phone. So there was a lot of times where, for example, I would walk to Aguadilla and film the cemetery, but I only had enough room on my phone to fill about half of it before I'd have to walk back to the wellness center, find some peace and quiet somewhere, whether it be late at night or early in the morning, to hide somewhere and narrate an episode so I can upload that onto my YouTube channel and then delete it from my phone so I could go back to the Aguadilla Cemetery again and finish filming it, and so on and so forth. So those 4 cemeteries that I worked on during that 3 week period, it took me a lot of time, and I had to go through a lot of extra leg work and whatnot just because of my lack of technological advancement at the time, really. But towards the last couple days of the trip, I realized that I could put a memory card in my phone. So all I had to do was go to Walmart and get a 250 gigabyte memory card, and I got one of those and I put it in my phone. So I was really excited to go on my next walk in Puerto Rico, knowing that I can get a multitude of cemeteries at once now instead of always having this struggle. So that really boosted my morale a lot when I discovered that I could use memory cards in that way when it comes to my phone. And I went on a little side adventure with my friends back to Isabella one day because they were looking at stuff themselves, and I ended up being able to film the other cemetery in Isabella as well and get that on my logs. So it was a very productive stay at Michael Morales's place at the Villa Marsana Wellness Center, and I recommend that place to anybody because the location is amazing and the people that run it are really good people, and it's a nice place to stay right there by the ocean. You can go out to the ocean in the morning and literally have almost complete privacy out there for large amounts of time. And I didn't even think that that was possible in Puerto Rico after being in San Juan for a month and walking across the North Coast. So we found ourselves at the end of our stay at the Villa Marsana Wellness Center, and we ended up moving to the Earth ship for a while, me and my friends. And the Earth ship in Puerto Rico is probably one of the coolest places you can ever go to on the island, if not the coolest. And it's kind of in the jungle out there by Aguada. But I'm not going to talk too much about the Earthship in this episode because I have a whole episode dedicated to the Earthship coming up at a later date. So stay tuned for that. But we're staying at the Earthship now, and about a week into it, I started getting cabin fever and planning my next walk. And I knew we were all going to go on a trip to Cabo Rojo, and we were going to check out this old abandoned prison that's there kind of by the ocean in the Cabo Rojo area. So I went with my friends to Cabo Rojo, and instead of driving back with them, I just had them drop me off at the Burger King there. And I wanted to walk from Cabo Rojo back to the Earthship and film and photograph some cemeteries along the way. And I remember right after they left feeling pretty nervous for a minute. I always do the first night when I'm out on the streets going on an adventure. It's always hard to sleep and my nerves are always up a little bit. But by about night 3, I'm pretty well ingrained into it and I can sleep better and things don't bother me as much. It's always a readapting process every time I go from staying somewhere to being back out on the street. So the first night in Cabo Rojo was a little rough. I couldn't find a bench that I normally like to find to sleep on, so I had to sleep on this terrible bus stop bench that was one of those benches that they have the armrests built into it, so you can't lay on it or anything. And even though I did anyways, I think I slept for an hour or two just sitting up. And I tried to lay down any which way I could, move my legs around any which way I could, but I only ended up getting an hour or two of sleep. And so I got up that next morning and went right back into the Burger King and made sure my phone was charged, and I got a cup of coffee, and I was ready to go on my adventure. So I walked to Puerto Rico, and that's an interesting community in of itself, and they have a beautiful cemetery there, I must say. Although it's one of the bigger ones on the island, so I knew I had my work cut out for me. And luckily I discovered the memory card thing, or that cemetery would have just taken me forever. But I went in there and I spent about 5 or 6 hours just taking pictures and making videos. And you could see those old episodes if you look deep back into my YouTube channel. Some of the older cemetery episodes from these original walks that I went on. And it was just a wonderful cemetery there, and that really boosted my morale a lot. And I made it back to Cabo Rojo and got something to eat, and I was bound and determined to find somewhere different to sleep than on that terrible bench that I tried sleeping on the night before. So what I did was I walked around for a while, and everything was just bare in Cabo Rojo. I don't know what it is about Cabo Rojo, but I couldn't find any of my concrete benches that I usually rely on. So me and all my infinite wisdom, I decided to sleep behind a pincho stand on the ground. And that didn't work out very well. I ended up waking up at about 4 in the morning with ants all over me. and it was terrible. But I mean, come on, I'm right there behind a pincho stand on the ground. I don't know what I expected to happen. I guess I was just tired and desperate and didn't think things through. It reminded me a lot of the first night outside on my walk across the North Coast when I slept on the sand by the ocean and got eaten up by sand mites. It just was just a lack of planning all the way around and desperation and bad decision making. So I paid for it. I got up and had to take my shirt off and, get all these ants off of me. And luckily, Burger King was opening up. So I went back into Burger King and charged my phone again and got a coffee and started planning my day of photographing the Cabo Rojo Cemetery, which is a real old, kind of ancient, historic cemetery. And I was really excited to visit it and photograph it. And I mean, I was there for hours. And you could see that episode too if you look back deep enough on my YouTube channel. So after I got done filming the cemetery in Cabo Rojo, I ended up walking to Hormigueros, and I filmed and photographed that cemetery as well. And that was a long, hot day, because from there I went to Mayaguez and found a really nice bench to sleep on. Mayaguez has one of the best benches that I've ever had the pleasure of sleeping on when I was walking on the streets in Puerto Rico. And right across the highway, there was a whole chain of food joints, and it's right by a shopping center and whatnot. So I found my old handy dandy Burger King and got a cup of coffee and charged my phone and charged my battery and hung out for a little while before I went to the store and got some actual dinner, and then went and laid out on that bench for the night with a stray dog that I fed a little bit. I couldn't help it. I try not to, but I always end up feeding the stray dogs in Puerto Rico when I'm on these walks. I got a good night's sleep, and I woke up ready and determined to go to one of the main cemeteries in Mayaguez. And I went there, and at the time I was there, they were painting the outside and stuff, so I couldn't get as many pictures and stuff that I wanted to, but I still was in there for 4 or 5 hours just walking around, taking pictures, recording videos, and working on my episodes. And that cemetery in Mayaguez was extra special as well. It was one of those cemeteries where you could really see the wealth disparity between people, because when I was walking through it, I saw some really big, beautiful statues. And then in another part of the cemetery, you just see a beat up little cross that was put into the ground, So you really got a sense for which people in the area had money and which didn't. I'm sure some of the tombs in that cemetery probably costed $1 million when you compare it to today's dollars. So I don't know how much that would have been back in the day necessarily, but nonetheless, that cemetery in Mayaguez was an amazing cemetery. And if you just type in No Name Explorations Mayaguez Cemetery, you should be able to find it on my YouTube channel, because even though I filmed it during my first year walking the island, and it wasn't on a very good phone with a very high quality camera, it still turned out pretty good in my opinion. And it's definitely worth checking out. So I left the cemetery in Mayaguez pretty happy. Although I knew I was going to have to make my way back up to Aguada, and Mayaguez is one of the, I'll just put it this way, one of the funnest places to walk through. I would say Mayaguez and Bayamon were the two craziest places I've ever walked through in the island of Puerto Rico, just because it's so packed and so condensed, and the populations are high and whatnot. And to be honest, there's not many people like me walking around from town to town because, I guess it is kind of crazy. But I just had to do what I had to do. So from Mayaguez, I went to Anasco, and I filmed and photographed the cemetery there as well. And the cemetery in Anasco is pretty notable to me because the people running it, they're really doing a great job at maintaining it and upkeeping it, and they've kept it really clean and everything's organized. And how I usually go about photographing cemeteries, especially in the beginning on this first trip to Puerto Rico, I didn't really tell anybody what I was doing or talk to anybody. I just kind of would go in to the cemetery and start taking pictures and stuff with my camera. And this was one of those times when the person that was running the cemetery came up and questioned me and asked me what I was doing. And I told him about my YouTube channel and whatnot and what I was doing there. And he let me continue taking pictures and stuff. And I got everything I needed and continued my walk from there up to Aguada. And if anybody knows Puerto Rico, that's a pretty brutal walk, especially on a hot, sunny day out there. When I was in Anasco and I talked to the guy that was running the cemetery, it reminded me of a time I was in San Juan when I was photographing a cemetery that I didn't realize was private, and they almost called the cops on me. But I took off out of there real fast and nothing ever came of it. And so that always made me worry a little bit each cemetery I went to. So this first trip, I just played it by ear. If there was somebody nearby, I would talk to them and tell them what I was doing and try to ask for permission. But there were plenty of times when I'd go to a cemetery and it was just me. I was literally the only person there. So I would just start taking videos and pictures and just see what would happen from there. And for the most part, besides that one time I got kicked out of that private cemetery, everything worked out pretty well for me. But I have a story for you guys in a later episode where I learned a new strategy as far as getting into the cemeteries and photographing them comfortably and whatnot. But like I said, the first trip in Puerto Rico, it was learning the ropes. It was the second trip in Puerto Rico where I really got a lot of things done and accomplished a lot. And I'm excited to tell you guys all about that and some upcoming episodes. So from there, I ended up staying the night in Anasco, sleeping on one of my handy dandy, ever reliable benches. And the next morning, I got up and marched to the Earthship that's up there by Aguada and stayed at the Earthship for about another week while I was planning my third walk of my first trip in Puerto Rico. I went on 4 walks total, so this would be walk number 3, and it was very possibly the most brutal walk of them all, but I have a lot of interesting stories about my third walk. I remember being at the Earthship the morning I was heading out, having a cup of coffee, and my body was just full of nerves knowing that I was about to go on this big adventure. Like I've said, it always takes a night or two of sleeping outside for me to get used to it, especially if I've been a part of the civilized world for a while, because you always get soft when you're a part of the civilized world. So I knew it would be a day or two before I was really back in the rhythm of walking and sleeping outside again. So I just sucked it up, finished my last cup of coffee, and started marching. I was hoping when I left the Earthship to make it to San German by the end of the night, which I did. But that concludes part 3 of this series, and in probably part 4 or part 5, I will continue where I left off here, because I think coming up I'm going to be talking about the Earthship in one of these episodes. So stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next time.